To create a JSON Web Token with the .NET 7 Web API, we first write a register method where we use bcrypt to hash the password of the user. Then we write a login method to, well, verify the password, and only if the credentials are correct, then we create the JSON Web Token and return it. So let's start with a Web API project. We use old school controllers, not a minimal API. And then the first thing we add is actually a user model and also a user DTO, a data transfer object that we will use to register a user and log the user in. So let's just create a models folder here and put both into this folder here. So the first thing, we add a new class, and this is a user class. And with that, you might probably already see the difference here to the DTO then, because this user here has got a username, which is a string, of course. By default, let's set this to string empty, so we get no warning here. And then not a password. What we want to store is a password hash value, but this is also a string because we will use bcrypt.net for that, and bcrypt will create this hash for us, but more about that in a minute. Now let's also create the DTO. This thing will look really similar. And yep, let's call it user DTO. We could also call this user request or response DTO if you want to get something or a user as a response back, but let's just call it user DTO for this quick and dirty example. And here we also have a username, which is again a string, and this time we can actually say this is required, so we get no warning. This is new to C#11, by the way. And also required a password, right? And this is the plain text password because we will only use this to send the data to the server, to the web API, meaning for registering and logging in a user. All right, so DTO and the user model. And by the way, we won't store the user in the database in this tutorial here. And that's why we don't have an ID, for instance, as a property, just the username and the password hash. And we will then create this user only for the current instance of the web API. I think this is totally sufficient for this learning purpose here. All right, so we've got our user, and now let's already create our controller here. We've got the weather forecast example controller already, but now let's also add another one. And this shall be an empty API controller, no read-write actions, no generated code, nothing at all. I think the empty one is the best for learning, and also actually sometimes for, well, most of the time in my case, I like it when the stuff is empty and I can start from scratch. All right, this is now the auth controller, let's call it that way. And in here now, well, first we need a user, right? So let's just add a static user. That's the one. This is also a user, and this is by default a new user, and we need the models namespace here, of course. And now we start with our register method. For that, we have to again use, or I want to use bcrypt, but we have to install the NuGet package for bcrypt. If you're following me for some time, you may already know that in my courses and in other tutorials, I used the cryptography algorithm here from .NET, but bcrypt is just state of the art. So let's use this thing. bcrypt.net is what we're looking for, and the package is bcrypt.net-next. All right, and let's just install this thing. There we are, and now it should be available here. And now register. This will be a post method. So HTTP post. I just assume that you already are a little bit familiar with the request methods and the attributes here. So this will be a post call. And since we are actually not using anything asynchronous, let's just return an action result and maybe just return the user here. So we see the actual result then. we want to use the user DTO, which is our request. Let me get some space here. All right, so I can breathe a little more. And now we need the password hash. All right, so for that, string password hash, and this now is bcrypt.net, then bcrypt, and then simply the method hash password, and here it'll be request password. That's totally correct in IntelliCode. We want to hash this thing, and as you can see, hash a password using the OpenBSD bcrypt scheme and a salt generated by bcrypt. And this is already interesting because with that salt, we make sure that the hash value is not always the same, even though the plain text password is the same, right? So if I have the password, I don't know, remember, for instance, and several users use this password, and we would just use a hashing algorithm like MD5, which you really shouldn't use because you can do it the other way around. And then from the hash value, you get the plain text password. So please do not use MD5. This is lots of time ago. But now with bcrypt, for instance, bcrypt already generates a salt value and puts the salt value and the plain text password into its algorithm. And then every time it hashes the password, another hash is the result. Although, again, the plain text password is actually the same. And where is the salt in this case? Well, it is put into the final hashed password value, right? So in this string then, password hash, there you will also find the salt. There are other ways to do that. For instance, you would generate a salt first and store this in the database. So you really have to know which salt you did use, which is also just a random string in essence. And then if you want to verify the password, you would use the plain text password and the salt then from the database. Long story short, with bcrypt, this is not necessary and it is state of the art. So maybe also the most secure way. Okay, and with that out of the way, we can just create the user with the username, request username, and the user password hash then is the password hash. And for this example, we just return the user. All right, so this is an important step for our JWT generation in essence, because I want to display a good flow here. We first register a user, then log the user in, and again, only if logging in was successful, then we generate the JSON Web Token. So here we've got our method in Swagger, string is perfect. We hit execute, and you see this is now our password hash. And pay attention now when we do this again. Just look at the endings, because here in front it could look the same, right? But you see every time the hash value is different, although we are using string as a password every single time. All right, this is registering, and now let's log in the user. And for that, actually, let me just copy paste this. Now it's time for copy paste errors. So again, it's a post method, but this time we call this login, and here also a login, the same DTO. And now let's just say we first want to check if the user is actually there. So we check if we've got the username. All right. So if username in our case, usually when the user would be in the database, then, well, of course you would find, or you would look for the user in the database. But here now, I think this is also sufficient for this tutorial. And in that case, I just want to test our API here. In essence, we return a bad request with user not found. All right, then verify. So now again, we use bcrypt here. And what we do now is bcrypt.net bcrypt. And here we can call the method verify. Verifies that the hash of the given text matches the provided hash. All right. And in here now, we only put our request password and then also the password hash value we generated earlier. And now if this is not true, so again, verify returns a Boolean value here, then again, we return a bad request telling us wrong password. And just as a side note, in production, maybe you wouldn't do it like that, because with that, an attacker would know, all right, the user does not exist, but then when it's telling the user that the password is wrong, an attacker would know, all right, this user does exist, so now I can brute force maybe the password or find it by brute force. So maybe you could test both or use the same error message like username or password is wrong, something like that, for a professional application then. All right, and with that, if everything is correct, we again just return the user. All right, and then the next step would be creating the JSON web token, but let's test this first real quick. Hope we're there. Yeah, there we are. So we register user string, nice name, nice password. And now what we can do, now we've got our user, right? It is now available in this instance of the web API. We try this out, and first, wrong name, user not found. Awesome. Wrong password, execute. Wrong password, works. So bcrypt at its best, and execute. We get again the string with the user password hash. Same thing as above, right? I guess. Looks pretty similar. Okay, and now finally creating a JSON web token. Real quick, the .NET Web Academy is now open for enrollment, but only for 2 weeks, and spots are limited. So if you want to join this 4 to 6 week program where you pretty much learn everything you need to land a job in the .NET web development world, speaking of web APIs, entity framework, code first migration, SQL Server, Blazor WebAssembly, Git, Azure, whatnot, then please check out the link in the video description below, because with that link you get a huge discount on this program, and you get also early access as soon as a new chapter has been uploaded, and you get also access to the community of the .NET Web Academy. So please check out the link. Thank you very much for considering. And now back to the tutorial. So what do we have to do here? Well, in essence, we would call a method, a private method that creates this token. All right, so let's write this method first. Private string, call this create token user. So in here we've got the username, for instance. And now the beauty of a JSON web token is that we can store so-called claims in this token, meaning it is a string of crazy characters, but still you can read, for instance, the user ID, the name, the role, the email address, whatever from this token. So let's just create one list of claims here for this token and only put the name into this token, and then we will see if we can actually find the name then when we get this token. So first, again, a list of claims, and claim is in the namespace, use system security claims, and we call this claims. This is a new list of claims, and we use the object initializer here to store again the username. For that we call claim types name, and here you see it already, right? It's not only name identifier is the ID, then we've got also role, and you can also put custom stuff in there, but let's just do it with the name here, and this is our user name. All right, and now down here it is getting interesting. This is a bit more complex, but this is how you would create a JSON web token manually here in a web API with .NET 7. First, we need a symmetric security key. All right, so var key is a new symmetric security key. And for that, we need a reference, and this shall be Microsoft Identity Model Tokens. So let's find and install the latest version, and yes, we stopped the application. So now we've got this thing here, and now in here comes a string, and from that string we wanna just get the bytes. All right, so this thing takes, as you can see here, a byte array. Now this is a key that is used to create the JSON web token and also verify the JSON web token whenever the user makes a call or the application makes a call with that web token, with that JSON web token. So we make sure that this is really a token that came from our application. Now we could just enter the string in here, or what we can do, at least it's a bit better than just putting the key hard-coded in here. We can put it here in the app settings and then just access the app settings here. So for instance, what you can also see in lots of tutorials is that you can call this JWT or app settings. That's the way I do it for tutorials like this one here. So we've got our app settings here with the token, for instance, or the key, and this key is a random string, top secret key, for instance. Make sure that it at least has 16 characters. Maybe you want to use a long string of 50, I don't know, something like that. That cannot be stolen, of course. And also there are other ways to do this. For instance, if you publish this thing to Azure, there are other ways to use a secure store for these kind of things. Anyways, this is how we can do it right now. And to access now the app settings, we need a constructor here. So first our AuthController, and we access the iConfiguration, call this iConfiguration. We create this field here, add the underscore, and now what we can do is actually we have to again encode this. So encoding and then UTF-8 and then get bytes, and in here now we access the configuration, say get section, we want the app settings section, and then the token. So that's how this is done, and from that we want the value, and this is definitely not null, right? So this is how we can access this thing, one parenthesis here, and this should work. With that we get our key. After that we need signing credentials. So var creds, for instance, new signing credentials. In here we put our key and then also an algorithm we want to use for our JSON web token, and this thing can be security algorithms, and then for instance hmake-char, let's just use 512 signature here. I think this is a good algorithm for that. All right, and next we actually generate our token. So var token is now JWT security token. For that we need system identity model tokens JWT. Find and install this thing, and this gets some options now. So in here what we can do is first put our claims. All right, the claims we created earlier on top. So claims would be claims, then an expiration date, so expires, and in here, well, you could use any date you want. For instance, just tomorrow. You can do that with datetime now, and then we only add 1 day, so this JSON web token is valid then for 1 day. And the last thing are the signing credentials. This is what we need. Credentials almost with a lowercase s. And in here now, these are our credentials. Let's also add the new keyword here. So now the error is gone. This is our token. And now the last step is to write the token. And for that, we say var JWT is a new JWT security token handler. And from this thing, we use the write token method with our token. And with that, we get a beautiful string. And here now we return our JSON web token. So let me just remove this. And again, create token with the user object. We need the user object to set the username as a claim to our token. Then we grab the key from our app settings. Credentials are needed with the key, and then the signature, the signing credentials, the signature algorithm here, hmake-char 512. Then we need the token. Don't forget the new keyword, JWT security token, with the claims, then an expiration date, and also signing credentials. And finally, we write the token with the help of the JWT security token handler here and return the JSON web token. And now up here, we just say string token is create token with our user, and here we return the token. Let's test that. There we are. Now let's try register again, maybe this time with a different name and different password. Hit execute. All right, we've got our hash value here. Now logging in. Try this out. Joel and Ellie, drum roll. There's our token. And now let's have a look if the name is really in there. For that, we go to JWT.io, and here in the debugger, we can just paste this thing. And here you can already see it. The claims name is indeed Joel. All right. And this is how to create our JSON web token. And now the next step is, of course, to read the token in our application. Use this token to make a call and then check if the user is really authenticated and also authorized with certain roles, for instance. And if you want to know how to do that, just click on the video on the screen.